Welcome to Finlos Asks. I'm happy to introduce you to Bobe McBride. Our stories intersected a number of years ago through our common experience of administering standardized testing. After that, we became colleagues and friends as teachers, and he eventually became an assistant principal at our shared school. During the pandemic, Bobe was a constant source of reassurance and reliability for students and teachers. His voice and presence were ubiquitous as this community navigated a rapidly shifting education environment. In this episode, we hear about Bobe's upbringing in Cairo, Georgia, how he acquired his work ethic, and the necessity of building relationships. Can you tell me a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and maybe your home life, your family?
Sure, absolutely. Um, I'm a country boy. Uh, though people say I don't necessarily sound like it, I think I do. Come from South Georgia, very small town, but I tell people all the time I come from a town of Olympic champions. And everyone's like, "What are you talking about?" Everyone knows that Jackie Robinson, well, I say everyone knows, but Jackie Robinson came from Cairo, Georgia. So big deal for baseball. But what I'm finding is not as widely known a fact is that Teresa Edwards comes from Cairo, Georgia. Teresa Edwards is a five-time Olympic gold medalist in women's basketball.
Wow.
And she was one of my babysitters when I was young. So I
Oh,
can say that I
wow.
was babysat by an Olympic champion.
That's so cool.
So yeah, so Cairo, Georgia, really small town. Oh, population, probably less than 10,000. My graduating class, I'm thinking maybe 200, maybe a little bit more than that. And it's won an award for being the hospitality city. And I can say that, for that genteel southern town, it really is that, despite all of the isms that we have with classism, ageism, racism, in Cairo, Georgia, people speak to each other. Perfect strangers will wave and say, "Hey, y'all, how you doing?"
Right.
So that's the kind of place I come from. Really conservative values there, so it certainly had its influence. But yeah, it's a nice place.
I see, I follow you on social media and I see you, you speak about your dad a lot. What was the relationship like with him, and were you close with him? Or are you close with him, I should ask?
Well, thank you very much for asking. Um, Regrettably, or unfortunately, as a circle of life happens, my father passed away. It will be 2 years in a couple of months. And growing up, I think that my father wanted a much stronger relationship with me than I wanted with him. And it's not that I didn't want a relationship with him. I just noticed that he favored my younger brother, and definitely my sister, much more than he did me. But in retrospect, that wasn't really the case. I am the oldest of four. And what I learned somewhat recently from my mother was that I spent quite a bit of time in the hospital as a newborn. I knew that I had some issues, but I didn't realize the extent of my health issues until, she started telling me all about them. And then when they got me home, my father would come home from work and get the baby, me, you know, out of the crib and just sit on the floor and play with me. She says, for an hour or two at a time. And he did that every day, until my younger brother was born. And so then, you got a playmate. So um, I guess at some point he just, stopped playing with me as much. And I honestly don't remember that at all. But, going through adolescence, teenage years, et cetera, my father was there. I knew I could count on him, but it was one of those things that I took for granted that I could count on him, sort of thing. Just the typical teenage thing. He and I did not develop a strong relationship until I was in my mid 20s. At that point, I started making some life choices with which my mother did not agree, but my father understood where I was and stood in my corner. And then, as the months and years went by, we got stronger and stronger in our relationship. And when his health started to decline, then I essentially became his caretaker, shared with my mom, that particular responsibility. But um, that was my guy. That I guess in some regards still is my guy because he's not here, but I still talk with him, imagining how the conversation would go. And sometimes it's really just me talking because he was so quiet, you'd never know he was in a room. But um, definitely, definitely my idol, my person that has many of the personality traits that I'm still trying to develop in myself. So, yeah.
Would that some of that be work ethic or how you try to present yourself to your community? Like, what sort of things do you try to emulate from him?
Oh, absolutely. Rest for my father was okay. Well, you know what? The Judeo-Christian faith system traditionally works with this whole idea of God, Yahweh, Jehovah, the Lord, created the heavens and earth and everything in it, all in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. That was my dad. Literally worked from Monday through Saturday, and on Sunday he rested. Uh, we got up in the mornings, and he was up with us, at 6 o'clock. Coffee and a grilled cheese sandwich every morning. That was his breakfast. And I'm like, Daddy, don't you want some eggs or some bacon? Nope, I want a grilled cheese sandwich. That was his thing. And then off to work he went. And, we get home from school, and uh, my mother changed faith system. So we started going to a different church. And so we ended up in church about 3 times a week. But sometimes my father would make it home before we got out of church. And many times it would be after we got out of church. And, by the time we got home, it's bedtime, 8:30, 9 o'clock. So we didn't always see him in the evenings. We saw him in the mornings, didn't always see him in the evenings. But that idea was he got up, he went to work. He went to work. There were days that I knew my father had the flu or pneumonia or something, but he got up and he went to work. And then, Sunday was his rest day. So while he didn't necessarily always join us for faith services or anything, um, we knew that Sunday was his rest day. So if he was asleep, then everyone in the house was as quiet as possible until he got up. Um, but it was that idea of respecting the fact that he worked constantly. And then when it was time for us to do something as a family, then everything else was shut off. He was with us 100%. It didn't matter if his boss was trying to reach him or whatever. He was with the family, and that's what we did. When he was out anywhere and someone spoke with him or had a question or whatnot, he genuinely had a conversation. When he asked, "How are you?" he meant, "How are you?" Not um, just this generic courtesy of "How you doing?" and keep walking kind of thing.
Hmm.
So
There's an intentionality, like when he's connecting,
yeah,
it's a connection.
yes, very much so.
Hmm.
And they weren't long conversations, uh, but they were definitely intentional. They were purposeful. You know, he did not just brush people off, to go on to something else. Everyone was important. And it's funny because I look at my father and say, you know what, he never ever met a stranger from what I could tell, but he wasn't necessarily the most gregarious or extroverted person. When I talk with some of my relatives and some of my father's classmates, you'd never know Robert was in the room. He was so introverted. Like, okay, well, that's not entirely true of me. But I also find that there are times where I don't say anything. I'm like, well, where do I get this from? This is not me. And oh, okay, I guess I got it from him and just didn't realize that that's where it came from. So, just that idea of, really understanding that you don't brush people off. When you ask someone how they're doing, stop, wait, listen for the answer so that they know you really are asking, how are you? How's it going? What's going on with you? Because you may be the only person that day that really paid attention to them. And I don't know that he ever said that to me, but it's just one of those things that I picked up from him. So, you know, that same thing. I do it, with adults. I do it with students.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter.
I was gonna say, as an administrator and as a teacher, I can only assume that that specific method of interacting with people, always as individuals, always with time and intentionality. How has that served you with your students?
One of the fastest ways for me to build relationships. And the first couple of times it's uncomfortable for some, not for all, but for the first couple of times it is uncomfortable for some because they're just not accustomed to either a teacher or just an adult in general asking and then really genuinely being interested and remembering when they said something, to ask about whatever that thing was later. You know, I had a student that, was telling me about, he's got a newborn in the house and, it's really great to have a younger sister now, but oh my God, I can't sleep and so on and so forth. I'm like, really? Why can't you sleep? Because when she starts crying and then my parents get up and then that wakes me up and so on and so forth. Okay. Well, some things to think about. Let's try to figure out how you can get some more rest, make sure you're concentrating because this is going to impact you for school. And then following up a few days later, hey, remember you were telling me about, you remembered that? Well, yeah, we had a conversation. So really just building relationships. And as an administrator, my view of administration is it's service. One is a servant. Yes, you lead. And then there are pieces of the job where one has to be direct about leadership and we're going in this direction and this is what we're going to do, sort of thing. But I also think that when we have or when I have those kinds of conversations with teachers as an administrator, it's listen, I can learn a whole lot by listening and trying to understand not just the words that are said, but what's the emotion behind them? What's the context? What else is not being said? What other questions do I need to try to get to make sure that that teacher is fully heard and that the issue can be addressed as best I can address it? Sometimes I can't do a thing about it, but at least the teacher knows that they were heard. So it's relationships. Nothing happens without a relationship of some sort.
When you were as assistant principal, the title was student affairs, but it's discipline. There's always, I think, a stereotype that goes along with both the type of student who is going through that office, but also the type of administrator who's in that office. Um, how did you approach that to try to not fall into those sort of traps?
Absolutely. I think I had the advantage of having had an experience with the office of disciplinarian a couple of different times. One during my student internship, and interestingly enough, that was also with the same principal that I had there. He also conducted my student internship for administration. So that was one. And then the second experience that I had was working as a dean of students in a charter school. Um, I think the dean of students at the charter school was the one that really helped me to pivot because there um, I had a mentor who also was working with students that were K-3, and I basically had 4 to 8. And what he did was a lot of proactive mentoring, for that student that was the child that was always busy, that always got into something that just, seemed to always have trouble follow them.
Hmm.
Getting to them early in the day. Hey, we're going to have a great day, and these are the things that are going to happen, and I'm going to check in with you at this time and that time, and so on and so forth. And so he would, manage to get different points in his day where he would check in with so many students, and sometimes he'd pull 2 or 3 of them at a time, just for a few seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, just to check in. How are they doing? Just to let them know I see you doing good, catching them doing something right. So when it got to that point that a teacher had to turn around and, write them up, send a referral, and, send them to his office, he'd already had enough positive capital built up with them that they were disappointed in themselves that they'd let him down. And so when he made the phone call with the parent, it went much more smoothly. And so for me, what I got from that was, okay, I know how to build relationships with students. I know how to make those kinds of positive things happen. So as soon as we identify those students who are at promise for having some opportunities to correct behavior or to realign themselves, okay, let me spend some time with you. Let me invite you to my office. Let me call you to my office when you're not in trouble, when there is no referral, simply to say, hey, how you doing? Who wrote me up? Nobody. I just wanted to see how you're doing. Everything seems to be going great. You have no referral. So I just wanted to see you. Or talking with them in the hallway, stopping and having lunch with them. One of the things that the assistant superintendent who had discipline as one of her duties, she made the point with us very early in the year that um, discipline is about correction. It's not about punishment. Okay, great, fine, wonderful. That is wonderful and great to say, but that is not the reality. That is not the image that is presented out there for discipline. And my immediate predecessor for discipline, eh, I could see where he tried to do some things more positively, but he was seen as that person that you come to my office, you're getting punished. That was just how it was run. And so for me, one of the things that I did do was meet with the dean of students to say, all right, look, I want to do things a little bit differently. I recognize that when students break one of the rules or they violate or whatnot, we we have to apply whatever consequences. I get that. I understand it. We want to be consistent with that. But at the same time, I'm also saying that if we have some frequent flyers, I want to know who they are so that I get a chance to see them before they become even more frequent. If we know somebody from the previous year that you saw a lot, let's go ahead and start talking with them now so that we don't see them or we see them far less frequently this year, in terms of how we're managing things. And then, there were those times where I had to give very direct messages to students. You will not do this, you will not do that. And if you do it, this is the consequence. And when one of the students I liked the most broke the rule, hey, what did I say? You said, okay, so what's going to happen? This is going to happen. Okay. And then we're done with that. But I guess really it's a fine line for that idea of discipline as you're the tough guy, you're the hard guy. But I also see it as you don't have to maintain that particular image if you don't want to. There's nothing wrong with saying, if you fight, you have 10 days out of school, period. And then put it out. But at the same time, turn around and say, okay, now you're out for 2 days. I've looked at the tape. I've got all your statements. I've looked at everything that's happened here. So while I originally assigned you 10 days, I think that 2 days is enough time for you because looking at this set of circumstances, this is what we can do. But this is what you will do to make up those days. And part of that is let's go through some conflict resolution training. Let's go through some counseling so that we try to figure out how do we even get to this point to begin with. Let's understand you might need to stay off social media. Let's find some other resources, some other things. So, I can still give you that tough guy image of, okay, you got the consequence that I gave you, but now I can go back and extend mercy, which also teaches, that whole concept of you don't have to be harsh all the time.
Hmm.
But again, it's relationships.
Yeah, I was going to say
Um,
it's none of those sorts of methods of sort of remediation or whatever you want to call it would be possible without that level of having built relationships with students, having positive interactions before you just come straight to the desk with these harsh, follow through. So I think that what you're describing makes sense, that those relationships are essential for everything.
but relationships, like marriage takes work because it's a relationship. Relationships with students, relationships with teachers, relationships across educational delivery systems. They take work. And, one of the opportunities that I see in ed leadership and administration graduate programs is really teaching people how to build relationships, teaching people how to maintain relationships, how to manage those relationships. In every ed leadership program that's worth its salt, there's going to be something in there about the homeschool relationship, and some of that work is going to be based on Joyce Epstein. She is by far the seminal work that we all look at for home and school relationships, home and school, school and community relationships. Joyce Epstein, she's the person. Great. But what about the relationships between an administrator and a teacher? What about the relationships between an administrator and the students? Those don't get discussed. And in terms of managing the school, we talk about managing human resources, that's part of the graduate work. We talk about managing the financial resources, part of the graduate work, part of the managing a bit of social capital, but that's only a little bit. But again, we don't talk about managing relationships to get done what needs to happen. So, there is that opportunity in graduate programs, and I wonder why we don't necessarily do that, but that's one of those things that's just not there.
Hmm. And I'm thinking of, teacher training programs, and a lot of that just practical experience. It's hard to have, and I always question whether you're talking about teacher training or administrative contact hours. Like, why does it take so long for these soon-to-be professionals to actually get into a classroom, to get into that practical aspect of doing the work? I have been a mentor to so many interns who they get into the classroom and they realize this is not where I want to be. This is not going to work out for me, and it's so hard
Mhm,
to look at that and say, well, it's a little bit late in the game for you to be making these discoveries now. So,
mhm.
so just a little bit more, like, what do you think? Whether we're talking about administrative or even teacher training, what can those programs do better?
Expose them faster. I mean, truly, my internship for my program didn't happen until the last semester. There was no authentic observation. I mean, I'm an overachiever. I did my own observations anyway, but there's no authentic observation built into a program until the end. Thinking about the local universities there, both of them wait until the third year before you do an observation. And the observation is just that. You're going in for a week up to 2 weeks and you're observing the teacher for maybe an hour at a time. And then after your observation term, then you have let's say with the one university that has the you teach. So student comes in and usually it's a pair and they teach one lesson over a 2 week period. And that one lesson they teach and then go back, revise, and teach again to a different class. And then that's the semester. Then we come back, in the last semester and say, okay, now it's time for you to student teach. I'm sorry, I'm confused. How about let's get them at pre-planning to go and sit with the teacher in pre-planning to understand, oh, you thought we were planning. No, sweetheart. What we're actually doing is sitting and meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. Oh, that 1 hour planning time, that's where we get to go into the room and try to put stuff up on the walls and actually put a lesson plan together.
Yes, the planning time will be 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Sunday before school starts.
Right, exactly. So I mean, they need to see that. They need to, and it's challenging, but they need to come in during the first few days of school. Maybe not the first day because that's always hectic in and of itself. But I'd also make the argument that no, they need to be standing in the back of the room on the first day. So before a student even comes on campus, they're just at the back of the room so they can see what the teacher's doing from the start of the day to the end of the day on the first day of school. This is what a first day of school looks like for you. Because, see, when you start your student teaching experience, if you started in the fall, the teacher has taken care of everything for the first few days of school, all the way up to the first 2 to 3 weeks. So by the time you're taking over, all the routines are set. No, 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 no. You need to be there and see how to do that. You can watch a Harry Wong video, you can read a Fred Jones book, you can whoever is the latest and greatest person for classroom management and setting up routines for school. It's the experience of doing it. And having you do it when you first get hired is not the time to do it. It's not going to happen when you do student teaching. Student teaching is a full safety net. And a student teacher who recognizes that it's a safety net understands then, okay, all I have to do is perform. And as long as I play my part and perform, I'm going to get my passing grade. I'm going to get out of my internship, and then off I go. As far as their certification tests go, it's a test. They've been practicing taking tests since third grade. So, with the exception of those that just have a difficult time passing their content area test or whatnot, that's fine. But the idea of how do you set up the routines in the classroom? How do you manage a classroom? How do you send a lesson plan to your assistant principal that asked for it 5 minutes ago? All these things that we don't teach because it's just not part of a program. How do you make a phone call to a parent to say, your child is really being a special one in class today, and I need them to normalize just a little bit. They don't need to be quite so special. What vocabulary do you use? I'm sorry, wait, do they practice that in their programs? We certainly did not practice in the Ed Leadership program. There was no practice for how do you talk to a teacher about poor performance. None, zero. There was no practice for how do you evaluate a teacher's performance. Zero. Here's one. I have a science background. Fortunately for me, because I'm a nerd, I have a couple of other things that are in my toolkit. But let's take your average administrator who only speaks one language and they have to evaluate a foreign language teacher. How do you do that effectively?
You don't.
What are you looking for?
Right, exactly. You don't.
So there's so many opportunities, but we wait until the end for some of these things. And I'm thinking, okay, why? Why are we not putting more of these pieces at the beginning? So if we're looking just at teacher preparation, if we want that teacher to make it past that 3 to 5 year mark, because that's when they tend to leave, then don't wait until year 4 to have them in a classroom for student teaching and then say, okay, now you're a full-fledged teacher. No, do the same thing that we do with medical professionals. Let's start you out year 1 of your program as a freshman in college. You have declared education as your major. Great. You're going into what grade level? Oh, you want to go in elementary? Fine. We have K to 5. You're going into one of these classrooms for the first 2 weeks of school. You will be there with that teacher for at least an hour during the critical parts of the day, not during the fluff parts. Put them in the critical parts of the day because that's what they need to see. They need to see the toughest parts of the job every step along the way so that by the time it's time for student teaching, then they're committed because they're like, okay, yep, I know what I'm getting into. Eyes wide open. And then if they make the decision to leave the profession, it won't be because they didn't know. The ones that are leaving now, I didn't know it was going to be like this. And they're absolutely right, because we did not prepare them. We didn't show them. We only showed them this is what is cushy with the safety net and everything's in place for you. All the routines are already set. Yes, kids are going to be kids, but everything's set. There's nothing for the student teacher to do except come in and just kind of carry the ball because they don't start teaching right away. They have 2 to 3 weeks where they're kind of being transitioned in. So by the time they start teaching on their own, most of them, it's like, okay, all I got to do is just keep following the template. Everything's
Exactly.
good.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with all of that. And again, part of this is I think that a lot of it, a lot of the, in my experience, a lot of the professors and teachers at the universities either have never taught in an actual classroom or in a K-12 school, or it's been so long that they have just completely the just education has shifted so far. So I just think a lot of it is just a lack of real practical experience, and I think that teachers and administrators are expected to continue their education the whole time while we're re-upping our licenses. I think it only makes sense that professors would have to do the same thing.
That was one of the things that I thought was absolutely crazy when I first started teaching. I'm like, okay, wait. So if I had a master's degree, I can become an adjunct professor and possibly follow a track and not ever have to take a
Never,
certification exam.
never.
That was just crazy to me. Like,
Hmm.
so why do I have to prove that I know what I know for public education? But when kids are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars, okay,
Yep,
all right, that makes sense.
yep. They can or not, but
Right, exactly. So not.
one more question about education, and I apologize in advance because it is going to be a big one. But we're kind of, people will say that we're coming out of it now, but you were in the trenches through the worst parts of COVID as an administrator, and I want to say first thank you because during those were some of the roughest years as a teacher, and I know for those students, yours was always a voice, and I can see this coming through from what you were telling me about the things that you're trying to emulate from your father's work ethic. Like you were a constant source of security and just reliability for students and for teachers. But
Well,
I
thank you.
absolutely, but also I observed how over time that was for the teachers and for the administrators just an exhausting time. How did those 2 years change you, change your view on education, students, or just life in general?
You are right. That is a big question. um, COVID happened at a very interesting time for me, career wise, because I was in the classroom as it started and then got promoted to assistant principalship um, in the midst of it. As a teacher in the classroom with it, I'd already started with my students this whole concept. Okay, well, let me go back just a little bit. With my students in my classroom, one of the things that I firmly believe is I don't care what your ability level is, you're going to college. Period. You don't have a choice. I will put you in a wheelbarrow and drag you. You are going. And so once I shock them with that statement, then I go back and clarify and help them to understand. Okay, now when I say college, I want you to understand that does not mean 4 year state university. That does not mean 2 year community college. College means any training that you do after high school to help you better your life, get a better job, build a better business, whatever it is that you're going to do to help you get the money that you're going to need to live. Because let's face it, that's what you need. You need money to live. We pay for everything. So, college, by Mr. McBride's definition, is any training, professional training that you get past high school. So, those of you that love to braid hair and do this hair and all that, go to cosmetology school, go to a Votech. And if your program lasts 18 months, you went to college because you have gotten a professional certificate that says that you are certified. You know what you are doing. You are qualified to do it. You were qualified to do it before you ever got it because obviously you did great work, right? Yeah, absolutely. But now, someone else who wants to hire you or you're starting your own business, you can show that you have been professionally trained. Off you go. Those of you that want to do welding, okay, well, now the school offers this program. So guess what? When you leave this program, if you don't even go to Votech, if you leave this program, you can still go and get a couple of certifications. Now, they're going to be low level. You could be making a lot more money if you go ahead and just take another year at the vocational school, go over to Lively. You can get this taken care of. I don't want to do school. Fine. Do you have a problem with going in the military? Well, I hadn't thought about it. Take the ASVAB. Once you find out what it is that you're naturally good at, then find out which branch of the military offers that particular thing that you're naturally good at. Sign up for the minimum number of years you can go. If the lowest number of years you can go is 2, then that's all you sign up for. Well, my friends said they were going to sign up for 6, sign up for 2. At the end of 2 years, if you decide you want to do more, great. But at the end of 2 years, you now have 2 years of specialized training. You got 2 years of college under your belt. Now, once you come out of that, if you decide you want to go to a community college or if you decide you want to go to a university, and let's face it, nowadays you can do everything online, then yeah, you can do that route. But When I say to you that everybody in here is going to go to college, you are going to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, a high school diploma is no longer enough for you to make the money you need to live. We're not talking about making sure that you can do everything you want to do just to survive, not to thrive, just to survive. A high school diploma no longer cuts it. You have to do something else. We got to do something else. So having that particular mentality established with the students very early in the year, by the time we got to COVID, we were already into that work ethic of whatever extra we got to do, that's what we got to do. So when we started having the additional assignments, well, my kids were already used to additional assignments, and I would purposely give them things that were higher than what their ability level was. Why are you making it so hard? Because that's what life is, and I want to get you ready. And if you can do this now, then later when you really need to do it, it'll be so much easier. Okay. So it was just kind of building that in. So for the students that I was assigned, that really wasn't much of a shift for me, to going to, okay, here are the work packets that we're going to do, because I would also already do that. They had reading packets assigned for my class for the week, in addition to other pieces. This is an English class. I don't care. I want you to read. I want you to annotate. I want you to do this. I want you to do that. So that when you do this in some other class, you already have the skill. Um, so that really wasn't as hard a shift for me from the teacher perspective with COVID. Um, I think what was annoying, just being candid, what was annoying for me was my knowing that some of my colleagues were not putting as much work in pre-COVID, and then the amount of work that they were expecting students to do during the early parts of COVID. And that just really annoyed me. And there's no other way I can say that. But it really did. Because
Hmm.
what? Why? You don't make them do this much work when they're sitting in class with you. Now they're at home with this global pandemic that we don't know what it is scaring the bejesus out of all of us. And you're expecting the student to do this much work on their own when you had them doing far less while they were with you. Unfair, unrealistic, and for me, just personally and professionally annoying. And then as an administrator, um, I think one of the biggest things I had with COVID is just understanding that things are different, trying to maintain an attitude of flexibility. And as much as I think that I'm flexible, I also recognize in myself that I like routines. I, I get up at 2:30. I'm in the gym by 3 o'clock. I do, I like routines. Um, so that does tend to carry over into my work. And so as an administrator during COVID, one of the things that I had to really grapple with was stay flexible. What worked today literally is not the same thing as yesterday, and it's probably not going to be the same thing as tomorrow.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
the rules were just changing day by day by day by day.
right. And then not only having that for myself, but then also looking at, okay, I just came out of the classroom. So I'm not forgetting where I came from, looking at it from a teacher perspective. All right, you just asked for this. Now you want this. Okay, now you want this. Okay, now you want this. And, just trying to go back and say to the principal, or to the folks above the principal, hey, look, decide what you want, because it's really stressing teachers out. And we got to keep them on board, because they're the ones who are connected to the students. We cannot personally contact all 2,000 students, but you have teachers that are connecting, with 150 to 180 at a time. So, I mean, what's it going to be? These are the folks that we have to support. I think more than anything, as an administrator, what COVID taught me was you have to communicate as openly and as freely as possible. One of the, I guess, job requirements, qualifications, that sort of thing, is maintaining confidentiality or only releasing information at a particular time. All right, confidentiality, I get. Some things must be kept confidential. But if I know that in 2 weeks we're about to shift something, it makes more sense to me. Go ahead and tell the teacher, hey, this is going to shift in 2 weeks. So don't put a whole lot of effort into this right now because you'll put all this energy in and then it basically is not going to mean anything 2 weeks from now. I don't want you to do it because if you're putting the energy in, then your expectation is your students are going to do it. And we certainly don't want them to be turned off because, too many of them are apathetic to learning as it is. So, if nothing else, that's one of the biggest things that it really reinforced for me was this whole idea of administrators having information and then just holding on to it. I got out of administration, but if I ever go back in, that is definitely going to be one of the fights that I have. That if I know it, I'm going to tell the teacher, unless it's one of those things that they just absolutely cannot know. I'm going to tell them they need to know. There is no reason to hold information a month when if they knew, even if we couldn't change anything, at least they knew, okay, this is going to change in a month. So all of this effort I would have put in, let me put just enough in to keep things going so that we all meet what we need to meet. And then a month when it changes, fine, I can pivot easily. And, just time after time saw that sort of thing happen. So, and, it's very easily avoided. Just communicate, just tell people what you know, be transparent. And again, I understand that for some things, an administrator simply cannot be transparent just because there are other directives and there are other pieces to the puzzle. But for other things, yeah, no, too many times I saw that happen where it's like, why aren't we sharing this information? Why didn't we just go ahead and say this up front? It could have saved so much time.
Are you happier to be teaching closer to home? And are you in Cairo? Is that where your school is now?
No, I am actually in Valdosta.
Okay.
Uh, my personal life took a couple of unexpected twists and turns, uh, but no, I'm not in Cairo. I'm in Valdosta. I do go to Cairo at least on the weekends just to see my mother, make sure that she's okay, and that sort of thing. But the return to the classroom, I think, has been a really good one for me. Um, I hate that the circumstances that forced it to happen occurred, but I'd rather be happy and healthy in a classroom than in the position that I was. Speaking quite frankly, we got to a point in administration where I simply was not taking care of my health because I didn't have time. I didn't make it a priority, and I just didn't have time to take care of me. And a body will let you know, oh, you can't take care of me, then I'm fine, let me shut down on you. And that's what it started doing. I mean, when I found myself in the hospital 3 times within 2 weeks, like, okay, something is wrong, this is not happening. And then a couple of other things happened behind the scenes, and it came to a point where I needed to make a decision. It was job or me, and I chose me. And interestingly enough, going into the next position now as a classroom teacher, I went in, to that interview and explained to that principal and his administrative staff, hey, look, I came from administration. I'm really not interested in going back into that. I'm happy to, lead from the classroom if you need to do a couple of things, but I'm going to have some health issues because, this is what happened with the last one. I couldn't take care of me. And now I have some things that have built up. And it probably took a good 3-4 months before things stabilized. And we're finding, I actually just got a call yesterday from the doctor's office. We found another issue. I'm like, no, that's an ongoing one. I just didn't tell you guys about it because I had enough starting with.
Oh no. Well,
It is what it is.
yeah. And I tell you, just following you as I do, you look happier. You have a just a vibe, and I could see it kind of draining you, and I'm happy to see you back in the classroom. Just seeing you smile with students. Is I think that's where you belong, and I'm happy to see that for you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Students are fun. And I think, for the first year and few months as an administrator, because I was fresh out of the classroom and because I taught so many of them, being able to walk through the campus and call so many students by name, and then, have the other APs and principals like, how do you know these kids? I taught them. So, knowing who they were and being able to talk with them, have conversations and laugh and joke with them and whatnot. And then, more toward the end where it was much more demanding for me in a different direction. Like, okay, yeah, no, I'm not happy. This is not what it was supposed to be for me. Um, I don't regret the experience entirely because, one of the things that uh, I do share quite proudly is I may have been run ragged, but if you dropped me in a school today and said, we need you to run it, you are the new principal. I'll make a few mistakes,
Hmm.
but it won't be a whole lot of them.
No, I will,
Uh,
and I will
I,
vouch for that. I will 100% vouch for that.
I got exposed to quite a bit.
Speaking of your health, for those who don't know you, your personal health, your personal fitness is very important to you. You dance, you twirl baton,
Mhm.
and you are a personal trainer. Has personal fitness and health, like, has that always been part of your routine of your life, and why is it so important to you?
Um, has it always been? No. And I think it started becoming important to me probably about 10 years ago. Looking at my parents and just realizing that they were getting older and um, just looking at their health and how they were doing and that they were starting to deal with some issues. And then what I guess really cemented it for me was when my father had his first stroke. When he had his first one, if you did not know him prior to that stroke, you wouldn't know that he'd had a stroke. You'd not think anything was different about him. But those of us, anyone who knew him knew, okay, he's talking a bit more slowly than he usually talks. Not that he ever talked a whole lot to begin with, but, talking a bit more slowly. Um, but in terms of thinking, oh my God, my father was an extremely fast thinker. And you could just tell, all right, it's taking him a bit longer to process things. And while I won't say that my father was necessarily the most physically active person, he'd give me a run for the money in a foot race. I mean, seriously, at his 50s and 60s, man could still get up and go. So after that first stroke, that wasn't as much. And what I did do then, though, was start at that point saying, okay, Daddy, you're going to come with me to the gym. And, did an age appropriate workout for him, kept weight light, kept, cardio circuits light. So it would be something that he'd enjoy and not see so much as a chore. And, that was my way of incorporating the physical therapy, occupational therapy, that they suggested for him. So, continuing those exercises. But that, in terms of the physical fitness and really paying attention to health, his first stroke pretty much cemented it for me to say, okay, this is what it's going to be. And I need to be as fit as possible to help take care of him. And that pretty much has been the case, um, for fitness, until his passing. Regrettably, about the time that he passed, I also had some things going on with my own health, and it took a toll. So, like I said, my first 4 months in the classroom position over here in Valdosta had some things going, so I couldn't go to the gym. I couldn't work out. I couldn't do everything I wanted to do. But I also had to realize, okay, that as part of aging, you also didn't take care of yourself. And you have to do things a little bit more slowly. You're not 20, you're not 30, you're 50. So yeah. take it in stride.
And how, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right. You adore, you call him your baby boy. How is Asa? Is it Asa?
Asa, that's Asa. Yeah, my Asa is 6 months old, and it's so funny. My partner is at home right now for part of the summer, and so Asa spends most of the day with him. But as soon as I drive up, jumps off his lap, takes off running, comes to me. And it's like he's coming to daddy. It does not matter if I'm holding something or not. He will
Mm-hmm.
wait until I put everything down and then jump up, and we just play for a while. But that's my baby boy. I'm a dog dad.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love seeing it, and I love that. It's sad that I don't get to see you every day, but it is great just to know you're there. And thank you for speaking with me. And
Absolutely.
yeah, this has been great, and I really appreciate it. And I miss you. I miss having you close by, but at least we can still talk.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll have to chat again.